It was a dreary Tuesday in September when my sister Charlotte rang saying she had important news. I was in the middle of a lesson, working as a maths teacher at the comprehensive school here in Kensington, London. The mobile vibrated 4 times before I could answer, and when I heard her voice on the other end, she had that tone of someone floating on air. I knew that tone well. Charlotte had always been too romantic, believed in happy endings since childhood. I, on the other hand, had learnt a long time ago that life doesn't always keep its promises. We arranged to meet at the cafe round the corner from my flat, that small, cramped place that smells of fresh scones and coffee, where we'd been meeting since the days when we still lived with our parents in Hampstead. She arrived with gleaming eyes, cheeks flushed, despite the drizzle cutting through the city that afternoon. She ordered a double cappuccino and stirred the little spoon for a while before speaking. I knew it was something big. When she finally opened her mouth, the words came out in an enthusiastic rush. She was engaged. She was going to marry. The bloke was perfect, she said. She'd met him at work 6 months ago and simply knew he was the one. My heart tightened a bit, not from envy, but from that fear every older sister feels when the younger one is about to take a huge step in life. I asked his name. She smiled and replied, "James Bennett." My world stopped. The noise of the cafe disappeared. The voices around became muffled, and all I could still hear was blood pounding in my temples. James Bennett, the name I'd been trying to forget for the past 9 years. The name my daughter Emily asked about from time to time with those enormous hazel eyes full of innocent curiosity. "Dad's called James, isn't he, Mum?" And I always dodged the subject, changed the topic, distracted her with something. Because James Bennett had abandoned me pregnant at 5 months when he discovered that being a father didn't fit with his plans to travel round the world and play in a band that never made it. I tried to keep my composure. I asked for more details with a voice that trembled slightly, and Charlotte noticed nothing. She carried on talking animatedly about how gentle he was, that he worked for a tech company, was 33 years old, came from Manchester but had been living in London for 7 years. Every detail matched exactly. I wanted to be sick right there, but held it back. I said I was very happy for her, that I couldn't wait to meet the chap. Charlotte held my hand across the table and said she wanted to introduce me to him at the weekend, at Sunday lunch at our parents' house in Hampstead. Mum already knew. Dad, too. Everyone was thrilled. Everyone except me, who knew I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of the family. When I got home that evening, Emily was in the sitting room doing her homework. She'd just turned 9 the week before and was at that stage where she asks 1,000 questions about everything. I looked at her and saw his face. It was undeniable. The shape of the eyes, the little crooked smile, even the light brown hair with those unruly waves. My daughter was the spitting image of the man who was about to become my brother-in-law. I spent the night awake, tossing in bed, thinking about all the possibilities. Did he know? Had he seen a photo of me and Emily on Charlotte's social media and pretended not to know me? Or did he genuinely not know he was about to marry the sister of the woman he'd got pregnant and abandoned nearly 9 years ago? I'd hardly told anyone about the pregnancy at the time. My parents knew, of course, but Charlotte was on a gap year in Australia when it all happened. When she returned, Emily was already born, and I simply said the father had left and wanted nothing to do with it. She never asked the name, never wanted details, always respected my space and my pain. The Sunday lunch at my parents' house was on a sunny day that contrasted with the weight in my chest. I arrived with Emily by the hand, her all excited because she adored her grandparents' house with that garden full of roses and the old Labrador that slept on the patio. Mum was in the kitchen finishing the roast beef and Yorkshire puddings, and the smell filled the entire house. Dad was in the lounge watching the football, and Charlotte hadn't arrived yet. I sat on the sofa and let Emily go play outside, my heart racing at every sound of a car in the street. When I finally heard the doorbell, everything in me froze. Dad got up to open the door, and I stayed there, motionless, unable to move. I heard her voice first, all that excitement, and then a male voice I knew far too well, deep, with that soft Mancunian accent that used to make me laugh. James entered the lounge and saw me, and from the way his face went pale, from the way his eyes widened, I knew immediately. He didn't know, hadn't the faintest idea. He stopped in the middle of the room, holding Charlotte's hand, and stared at me as if he'd seen a ghost. Charlotte noticed the tension and looked from me to him, confused. Mum came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on her apron, all smiles, and began the introductions. This is Rachel, my eldest daughter, and James, Charlotte's fiancé. He extended a trembling hand, and I shook it quickly, feeling the cold dampness of his palm. We need to talk, I said quietly, just for him to hear. Charlotte was distracted, hugging Dad. James nodded with a desperate expression. But before we could say anything, Emily came running in through the back door, all muddy, laughing in that raucous way of happy children. She stopped when she saw people in the lounge, and then her eyes met James's. It was instantaneous. She stood there staring at him with an intensity that frightened me. I had some old photos of him stored in a box, photos she'd found once and looked at, trying to understand who that man was. The silence in the room was deafening. Emily took a few steps towards him, her little head tilted to the side, studying every feature. James was completely paralyzed. Charlotte looked at me pleading for a silent explanation, but I couldn't speak. Mum had stopped smiling. Dad had turned off the television. "Who are you?" Emily asked in a thin but firm voice. James opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at me desperately, and I knew I had to do something before everything collapsed right there. But I was frozen, unable to act, watching my daughter getting closer and closer to the man who'd abandoned us, the man who was now about to marry my sister. Emily stopped right in front of him, so close she had to lift her head to see his face. I saw Mum bring her hand to her mouth, eyes wide. She'd just realized. Dad frowned, still trying to understand. Charlotte was completely lost, looking from me to James, then to Emily, trying to piece together the puzzle. That's when Emily spoke, with that absolute certainty that only children have. "You look like me." James crouched down, getting to her height, and I saw tears forming in his eyes. Charlotte let go of his hand and stepped back. "Rachel, what's going on?" she asked with a trembling voice. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Mum approached and put her hand on my shoulder. I breathed deeply and finally managed to say it. "This is Emily's father." The room exploded in silence. It was the kind of silence that's louder than any scream. Charlotte went white, then red, then white again. James didn't take his eyes off Emily, who continued to look at him with curiosity. Charlotte took more steps back until she was leaning against the wall. "Did you know?" she asked with a breaking voice. He shook his head frantically. "No, I swear I didn't know. I didn't even know Rachel was your sister. She's got a different surname to yours, works somewhere else. Never showed me a photo of her. I would never have imagined. It was true. I'd kept my maiden name, whilst Charlotte had taken our parents' double-barreled surname after the divorce and Mum's remarriage. The pieces began to fit together for everyone at the same time. Dad was the first to react. He stood up and asked James to leave. Now. His voice was hard, that voice I hadn't heard since I was a teenager and had done something seriously wrong. James stood up, still looking at Emily, and began walking towards the door. But Emily ran and clung to his leg. "Don't go away. I want to know you." Everyone's heart in the room broke a little at those words. James looked at me, and I saw in him something I'd never seen before. Genuine regret, fear, desperation. Charlotte slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, sobbing. I went to her, knelt down, tried to hold her hand, but she pushed me away. "How could you? How could you not tell me?" I tried to explain that I didn't know who her fiancé was until that Tuesday, that I never would have imagined it would be him of all people, that I was trying to work out what to do. But she didn't want to listen. She was betrayed, humiliated, destroyed. Mum helped James gently detach Emily's leg and asked my daughter to go to the bedroom. Emily obeyed reluctantly, but before leaving, she turned and said to him, "I've always wanted to meet you." James wiped his face with the back of his hand and left through the front door without looking back. The gate slammed, and I heard his car starting in the street. Charlotte remained on the floor, crying in a way I'd never seen her cry. Dad went out onto the patio, unable to deal with all that emotion. Mum stood between me and Charlotte, not knowing who to go to first. "I'm your sister," Charlotte said between sobs. "How could he do this to me? How could you let this happen?" I tried to explain again, but she got up and went to her bedroom, slamming the door. The Sunday roast went cold on the table. Nobody ate anything. I took Emily and we left in silence, her with her hand in mine, asking me at every corner if she'd see that man again. The following days were hell. Charlotte wasn't answering my calls. Mum said she was devastated, that she'd canceled the wedding, that James had tried to speak to her, but she refused to see or hear anything. She was rebuilding herself, but blamed me for destroying her dream. I felt guilty, although I rationally knew I hadn't done anything wrong. But she was my baby sister, the person I'd protected all my life, and now she was suffering because of a situation involving my past. Emily, on the other hand, wouldn't stop asking questions. Where does he live? When can I see him again? Why did he leave when I was a baby? Does he like ice cream? Each question was a stab. I didn't know how to answer, didn't know how to explain to a 9-year-old child that her father had chosen not to be part of her life. But that fate had decided to bring him back in such a cruel way. 3 weeks later, I received a message from him. It was a long text, apologizing for everything, saying he'd been a coward, that he should never have left, that he regretted it every day. Also said he'd broken up with Charlotte, that she couldn't look at him, that the engagement was off. Said he wanted to meet Emily, that she deserved to have a father, even if he was the worst version of a father that could exist. I didn't reply immediately. I spent days thinking, weighing up, talking to my mom, to my therapist, to Emily's teacher. Everyone said the same thing. The decision was mine, but a child shouldn't pay for the mistakes of adults. If he genuinely wanted to be part of her life, and if he was prepared to take responsibility, perhaps it was worth giving it a go. Not for me, not for him, but for Emily. I arranged a meeting in a public park on a Saturday morning. I took Emily with me, but made it clear to James that I'd be nearby the whole time. He arrived on time, with a gift wrapped amateurishly. Probably he'd wrapped it himself. Emily ran towards him when she saw him, without any grudge, just that pure curiosity of a child. They talked, sitting on a bench, me watching from a distance. I saw him showing photos on his mobile, probably of his family. I saw Emily laughing at something he said. I saw him discreetly wiping his face when she asked something. I stayed there an hour, and when they finished, Emily came running to me with the gift in her hands. It was a storybook. She was beaming, but the price of my daughter's happiness was high. Charlotte still wasn't speaking to me. 4 months had passed since that disastrous Sunday lunch, and she was ignoring me completely. Mum played intermediary, telling me bit by bit how she was doing. She'd taken sick leave from work, was having therapy, had blocked James everywhere. She was rebuilding, but held me responsible for destroying her dream. I understood the pain, but also felt unfairly treated. It wasn't my fault that the man she'd chosen was precisely the only man on the planet I never would have wanted to see again. One afternoon, Mum rang saying Charlotte wanted to speak to me. My heart raced. I arranged to go to my parents' house that very day after work. I left Emily at a friend's and drove with sweaty hands on the steering wheel. When I arrived, Charlotte was on the patio, sitting in the rocking chair that Mum loved. She was thinner, with deep dark circles, hair tied up any old how. I sat in the other chair and waited for her to speak. The silence lasted several minutes, just the creaking of the chair and birdsong in the garden. "I don't blame you," she finally said, her voice hoarse from crying too much. "I wanted to blame you, wanted to have someone to throw all this anger at, but it's not fair. You didn't know. He didn't know. It was just a horrible coincidence." I breathed relieved, feeling tears rising. "But it still hurts," she continued. "It hurts to think I was about to marry the man who abandoned my niece. It hurts to know you went through this alone whilst I was in Australia posting happy photos. It hurts to realize I didn't even properly ask about Emily's father all these years." I held her hand over the arm of the chair. Charlotte squeezed back weakly. "Are you going to keep letting him see Emily?" she asked. I confirmed yes, that it had been difficult to make that decision, but that Emily deserved to have a father, even if imperfect. Charlotte nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "He rang me last week," she said. I didn't answer, but he left a voicemail. Apologized again. Said he never wanted to hurt anyone, that life sometimes plays cruel tricks. More months passed. James began seeing Emily fortnightly, always in public places, always under my supervision. Gradually, we built a dynamic that worked. He never tried to be more than he should, never overstepped boundaries, respected my rules. Emily flourished with the attention, started talking more about him at school, drawing the family in art lessons, including the father. I processed everything with the help of therapy, trying to separate my resentment towards him as an ex from my desire for my daughter to have a present father figure. Charlotte returned to work, met a new bloke, a colleague from the gym, started smiling again, slowly, but started. One day she invited me for coffee, like old times. We sat in the same cafe where she'd told me about the engagement almost a year earlier. We talked about mundane things first, testing the waters. Then she asked how it was going with James and Emily. I told the truth. It was strange, it was difficult, but it was working. He'd changed, seemed genuinely remorseful and committed. Charlotte was quiet for a while, stirring the sugar in the coffee. "You know what's maddest?" she said. "I still miss him sometimes. Not the real man, but the idea of him, of what I thought we had. But at the same time, I look at Emily and see how happy she is, and I realize that perhaps things had to happen as they should. If I'd married him without knowing anything, I would have found out eventually, and it would have been even worse." I agreed. The universe had a strange way of sorting things out. It wasn't the ending anyone had expected, but it was what we had, and we needed to make it work. Weeks later, Mum organized a barbecue at her house, a small gathering, just close family. Charlotte came, I came with Emily. Dad was there. It was the first time we'd all been together since that fateful Sunday lunch. The tension in the air was palpable at first, but Emily, with that lightness of a child, started playing with everyone, telling funny stories from school, showing the good marks she'd got. Gradually, the house filled with laughter again. In the middle of the barbecue, the doorbell rang. Mum went to answer and came back with a strange expression on her face. "There's someone here for you," she said, looking at me. My stomach churned. I went to the door and saw James standing on the pavement, hands in pockets, visibly nervous. "What are you doing here?" I asked quietly. He explained he'd brought an early birthday present for Emily as the date was approaching, and had come to drop it off, but saw the cars out front and realized there were people. He was just going to leave it at the door and go. I sighed. Charlotte appeared behind me, saw him and stopped. They looked at each other for long seconds, and I stood there in the middle, not knowing what to do. It was Charlotte who broke the silence. "Stay for the barbecue." The sentence came out so naturally that even she seemed surprised. James's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" Charlotte shrugged. "Emily would be pleased, and we need to learn to coexist since you're now part of her life. Doesn't mean I've forgiven you, but it means I'm trying to move forward." James entered the house slowly, as if walking on eggshells. Emily gave a shriek of joy when she saw him and ran to hug him. Dad went serious, but greeted with a nod. Mum offered a glass of lemonade. The afternoon proceeded strangely, but not uncomfortably. James stayed in the corner most of the time, chatting with Emily, responding politely when someone spoke to him. Charlotte stayed on the other side of the garden, but she didn't leave, didn't flee. It was a beginning. A crooked, imperfect beginning, full of wounds still open. But it was a beginning. When evening fell and people started leaving, James said goodbye to Emily with a long hug. She made him promise he'd come back for her birthday. He promised. He left through the front door and stood for a moment on the pavement, looking at the lit house full of voices. I walked him to the gate. He turned to me. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me be part of her life, for not shutting the door on me completely. Despite everything." "I didn't do it for you," I replied honestly. "I did it for my daughter." He nodded. "I know, and that's why I'm grateful. You've always been stronger than me." That took me by surprise. It wasn't exactly a compliment, but it was an acknowledgement. The months passed and became a year. Emily's 10th birthday arrived, and we had a party at my flat. Charlotte helped organize, put up balloons, made trifle, those things we used to do together when we were younger. James came with a huge present, a bicycle Emily had asked for. She nearly fainted with happiness, jumped on his neck shouting, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." I saw Charlotte observing from afar, arms crossed, with an expression I couldn't decipher. After the children were all playing in the garden, she came to me in the kitchen. "He's a good father," she said suddenly. I looked at her surprised. "I mean, he's trying. You can see it." I agreed. He really was. Turned up to arrangements, rang Emily during the week, asked about school, about friends. paid maintenance on time without me having to ask. He wasn't perfect, but he was present. Charlotte sighed. I thought I was going to marry him, have children with him, build a life, and now I look back and see I didn't even really know him. We had 6 months of a relationship. I was in love with the idea of him, not the real person. I put my hand on her shoulder. And now? How are you really? She gave a small smile, but genuine. I'm better. I've met Oliver, you know. We're taking things slowly, no rush, and I'm learning not to idealize people. Everyone has a past, everyone's made mistakes. What's important is who we choose to be now. That moved me. My baby sister had grown up, had matured through pain, and even though I hated that she'd suffered, I was proud of the woman she was becoming. The party went beautifully. Emily blew out the candles surrounded by people who loved her. James took photos, but always stayed in a discreet spot, respecting boundaries. When the guests had gone, and only the mess of confetti and cake remains was left, Charlotte helped clean up. Emily had crashed on the sofa, exhausted and happy. The 3 of us stayed in the kitchen washing up. Me, Charlotte, and Mum. Like old times. Mum broke the silence. Life's funny, isn't it? We make plans, imagine how things will be, and then everything changes overnight. But in the end, what matters is that we have each other. Family is that. It's forgiving. It's starting over. It's accepting that nobody's perfect. 2 weeks after that birthday, something unexpected happened. I was marking papers on a Friday evening when my mobile rang. It was an unknown number. I answered cautiously. On the other end, a woman's voice I didn't know introduced herself as Sarah, James's sister. My blood ran cold. She said she needed to speak to me urgently. It was about James. My first thought was that something had happened to him, an accident, an illness. But she quickly explained it was nothing like that. It was about something else. We arranged to meet the next day at a cafe near my flat. I barely slept that night, imagining 1,000 scenarios. When I arrived at the cafe, Sarah was already there. She was a woman about 40, short hair, serious but kind expression. She went straight to the point. I found out about Emily recently. My brother told me everything. About abandoning you, about the reunion, about Charlotte, and I needed to meet you to apologize on behalf of our family. I was confused. Apologize for what? She sighed deeply. Because we raised him wrong. Our parents spoiled him too much, let him believe he could do what he wanted without consequences. When he said he was going to drop out of uni to play in a band, nobody stopped him. When he abandoned you pregnant, nobody went after him to demand responsibility. We failed with him, and consequently failed you and Emily. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't expected this. Sarah continued, but I want you to know there's a whole family here who want to meet Emily. She's got grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, people who knew nothing of her existence until recently, and who are desperate to be part of her life if you'll allow it. That totally surprised me. Family. Emily would have more family, more people to love her, to be there at birthdays, to ring when she gets good marks. I promised to think about it carefully, and I thought. I spoke with my therapist, with my mum, with Charlotte. Everyone said the same thing. If they were good people with good intentions, why deny Emily that? 2 weeks later, we organized a lunch. I took Emily to James's parents in Manchester. We made the journey by train, her excited looking out the window. When we arrived, there was a house full of people waiting. Her grandmother cried when she saw Emily for the first time. The grandfather was moved, holding tight the hand of the granddaughter he'd just met. The aunts and uncles, the cousins, everyone wanted to talk, wanted to know about her, wanted to give belated presents from all the missed birthdays. It was moving and overwhelming at the same time. James was there too, but stayed in the background. Let his family play their part. At the end of the afternoon, when we were leaving, his mother hugged me tight. Thank you for giving us this chance. We'll make up for lost time, I promise. And they did. Every month, some member of James's family came to London to see Emily. They sent presents, rang, made video calls. Emily gained an entire family overnight, and the maddest thing was that Charlotte also grew closer to them. At a barbecue at my parents' house, months later, James's sister came to meet Emily's family. Charlotte was there. They talked at length. Sarah also apologized to Charlotte for what her brother had done. Charlotte accepted graciously, said it had been painful, but in the end, it had been better to find out before than after. The two ended up becoming friends. Life had taken so many turns that nobody could keep up anymore. One day, nearly 2 years after that catastrophic Sunday lunch that changed everything, I was in the kitchen making dinner when Emily came and hugged me from behind. "Mom, I'm so lucky," I laughed. "Lucky why, my love? Because I've got 2 families, yours and my dad's. And now everyone likes each other. Even Auntie Charlotte isn't sad anymore when she sees my dad." That hit me right in the chest. She was right. Against all odds, against all logic, we'd managed to build something functional from that chaos. It wasn't a traditional family. It wasn't what anyone had planned. But it worked. And in the end, that's what mattered. Weeks later, Charlotte rang me all excited. She'd got engaged again. This time to Oliver. She wanted a small wedding, intimate, just family and closest friends. And she asked me if I'd mind if she invited James. I was surprised, but I understood. He was my daughter's father, was now part of our lives, and Emily would be upset if he wasn't there. "I've no problem," I replied honestly. And I genuinely didn't. Time had healed many wounds. The wedding was beautiful. A simple ceremony at a country manor in the Cotswolds, in the middle of the August heat. Emily was flower girl, all proud in her dress full of lace. James came with his family. They sat on the other side of the church. When Charlotte entered to the sound of the wedding march, she was radiant. Oliver cried when he saw her. The vicar spoke about new beginnings, about forgiveness, about building the future without forgetting the past. During the reception after the ceremony, something happened that nobody expected. Emily was playing with the other children when suddenly she stopped and went to James. She took his hand and led him to where Charlotte was talking with the bridesmaids. "Auntie Charlotte," she said with that determined child's voice, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened. I know it was difficult for you, but I'm glad you found Uncle Oliver, and that everyone's friends now." Charlotte knelt to her height, eyes glistening. "I'm glad too, Emily, and none of what happened was your fault. You're the most precious thing that came out of all this." James was visibly moved, looked at Charlotte and said quietly, "I really am sorry for everything." Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. "I know, and I forgive you. Doesn't mean we're going to be mates, but it means I choose not to carry anger anymore. Life's too short for that." They hugged briefly, a quick and slightly awkward hug, but sincere. Emily clapped as if it were the best thing in the world, and for her, it probably was. Seeing the adults in her life at peace, all in the same place, without tension, without drama. On the other side of the hall, Mum held my hand. "Did you see that?" she asked with a choked voice. I confirmed, wiping my own tears. "Who'd have thought?" she continued. "From that awful day came all this. A bigger, more complex, but loving family." I agreed. Life had a strange sense of humor. The ending wasn't what anyone had imagined. It wasn't the fairy tale Charlotte dreamed of when she rang me saying she was getting married. But it was real. It was imperfect. It was honest. And it was ours. Emily would grow up knowing families come in all shapes, that people make mistakes but can redeem themselves, that forgiveness is possible even when it seems impossible, that love isn't limited, can expand and include people you never imagined. And most importantly, she'd grow up surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. I looked around the hall. James chatting with Dad about football, Charlotte dancing with Oliver, Emily running between the tables with her father's cousins, Mum handing out shortbread, Sarah taking photos of everything. It was chaotic. It was strange. It was perfect, just as it was. Months after that wedding, on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, I was coming back from work and saw James sitting outside my building. I was startled. We'd agreed he'd see Emily at the weekend. I got out of the car, worried. "Has something happened?" He stood up, hands in pockets. No. Sorry for turning up like this. I just needed to talk to you." We went up to the flat. Emily was at netball, so we had time. We sat in the lounge and he hesitated several minutes before finally speaking. "I've received a job offer. In Edinburgh. It's a big promotion, a much better salary." My heart tightened. He was leaving again, was going to disappear from Emily's life just as he'd appeared. But before I could say anything, he continued, "But I'm not going to accept it." I shook my head, confused. "Why not? It's a good opportunity." He looked me straight in the eyes. Because I spent 9 years without my daughter. I'm not going to waste any more time. Money I can earn here as well. But seeing Emily grow up, being there in the important moments, that I can't get back if I lose it, I was speechless. This wasn't the same man who'd fled when he found out about the pregnancy. This was someone else. Someone who'd learnt, who'd grown. Are you sure? I asked. He nodded, convinced. Absolutely. Emily is now the most important thing in my life, and I know I don't deserve to be called a father. No, I failed in every possible way. But if you give me this chance, I want to prove I've changed. Not through words, but through actions. I breathed deeply. All right, but I'll hold you to it, right? If you promise to be present, you'll really have to be. On good days and bad. At school events and parents' evenings. When she's got a fever and when she gets bad marks. It's not just turning up in Instagram moments. He nodded seriously. I know, and I'm ready for that. We shook hands, a silent pact. When Emily came back from netball and saw her father there, she was euphoric. He picked her up and spun her round, promising that from now on, he'd be even more present. She made him promise he'd come to the dance show at school the following week. He promised, and he kept it, and kept on keeping it in the following months. He turned up at shows, at matches, at friends' birthday parties, started picking her up from school once a week. Gradually, without fanfare, he built a real relationship with his daughter. A whole year had passed since that transformative wedding of Charlotte's. Emily had just turned 10. She was at that preteen stage, questioning everything, testing boundaries. On a Friday evening after dinner, she was on her mobile when suddenly she spoke without taking her eyes off the screen. "Mum, I want to spend a weekend at my dad's house. I nearly choked on the water." "What?" She finally looked at me. "Dad invited me. Says he's got a spare room in his flat, that we could have a father-daughter weekend, watch films, eat pizza, those sorts of things." My first instinct was to say no, but then I stopped. Thought about everything that had happened in the last 3 years. James had repeatedly proved he was reliable, had changed, was present, paid maintenance, rang, turned up. Why couldn't I give this vote of confidence too? "I'll think about it," I replied. Emily sighed dramatically but didn't insist. I spoke with my therapist, with my mom, even with Charlotte. Everyone said the same thing. If I felt it was safe, if James had shown responsibility, why not? It was part of the co-parenting process. I rang James. She told me about the invitation. He confirmed, anxious. "I know it's a big step, but I really want to have this time with her. Get to know this version of her better. It's not to take time away from you or anything. It's just so we can build memories too." "I know," I replied. "And it's fine. It can happen." I heard the joy in his voice. "Really? Rachel, thank you. I promised to look after her well." And so it happened. The following weekend, Emily went with a rucksack full of things to her father's house. I stayed anxious the whole time, but she came back on Sunday evening beaming, told me they'd made pancakes for breakfast, watched all the Harry Potter films, played video games till late, that Dad had talked to her about school, about friends, about the things she liked. It had been perfect, and it became routine. Once a month, Emily spent the weekend with James. I used that time to do things I couldn't do with her at home: read, watch series, go out with friends, rediscover myself as Rachel, not just as a mother. It was liberating. Things were finally in a good balance. Until one day, 6 months later, James turned up again unannounced. This time he brought someone with him. "Rachel, this is Lucy, my girlfriend." My world tilted again. Girlfriend. James had a girlfriend. Lucy was pretty, friendly, a PE teacher. She extended her hand with a genuine smile. "It's lovely to meet you. James talks about you a lot, about what an amazing mum you are." I didn't know how to react, shook her hand a bit awkwardly. James explained they'd been together for 5 months. It was going well. He wanted to introduce me to her before introducing her to Emily. Wanted my approval first. That surprised me again. He was genuinely being responsible, thinking of his daughter before everything. We talked, the 3 of us, in the lounge. Lucy told me about herself, about work, about how she'd met James at a running club, said she knew about Emily, knew the whole complicated story, and didn't want in any way to interfere or try to be a mother substitute, just wanted to be a positive presence in his life, and consequently eventually in Emily's life, if everything went well. I liked her. It was impossible not to. She was genuine, respectful, aware of the delicate situation. I gave my blessing for James to introduce her to Emily. And he introduced her. Emily adored her, especially because Lucy played netball and taught her some tricks. In the following months, Lucy became part of the routine, was present when Emily went to her father's. They cooked together, went out for walks, did family things, and for the first time in all those years, I felt truly at peace with everything. James had built himself a life, was happy, and most importantly, he was a present and responsible father. Charlotte also had her life with Oliver. They'd recently announced they were trying for a baby. Mum was excited about the possibility of another grandchild. Dad had retired and spent his time looking after the garden. Emily was growing up healthy, surrounded by love. And me? I'd finally started dating too. A fellow teacher, Thomas, who had infinite patience with my neuroses and made me laugh. Things were falling into place. Not in the way anyone had planned years ago, but they were falling into place. In the end, that shout from Emily at the Sunday lunch had been the catalyst for everything. It had detonated a bomb, yes, but from the rubble, we'd built something solid. It had hurt. God, how it had hurt, but it had been worth it. I look back now at that day in the church when Emily would potentially shout, "He's my father," and the groom would try to flee, and I realize it was the best thing that could have happened, because it revealed the truth before it was too late. Before Charlotte married a man carrying such a heavy secret, before Emily grew up more without knowing her father, before James continued fleeing from responsibilities. It was brutal, it was public, it was humiliating for everyone involved, but it was necessary. Sometimes life needs to shake us violently for us to wake up and see what really matters. And what matters, we discovered, is family. Not in the traditional, perfect, advert sense, but in the real, chaotic, complicated sense. Family is forgiving the unforgivable because the alternative is worse. It's choosing every day to build bridges instead of walls. It's accepting that everyone's flawed, but that doesn't mean they don't deserve love. Emily is now 10 years old, strong, intelligent, full of life. She's got 2 families who adore her, has a mother who'd die for her, has a father who learnt to be present, has an aunt who overcame the pain and became her best friend, has grandparents on both sides who spoil her, has a potential stepmother who respects her, has a gigantic, complicated family that's absolutely perfect in its imperfection. And when she asks me about that day, about the Sunday lunch that changed everything, I tell the truth. I tell her it was horrible and wonderful at the same time, that it destroyed and built, that it hurt and healed. She listens to everything attentively and then says, "I remember him, from the lunch. I remember seeing his face and feeling something strange here," and she points to her chest, as if I already knew him from somewhere. And when I said that, it's because I couldn't hold it in. It had to come out. I hug her and tell her it was the best thing she could have done, because sometimes the truth needs to shout to be heard. And this story shows that even from the most painful moments, something beautiful can emerge, that families don't need to be perfect to be full of love. That forgiveness is a process that takes time, but is possible. If this story touched you or resonated with you, then please do subscribe so you don't miss any more emotional stories. Write in the comments if you've ever been in a similarly complicated family situation and how you dealt with it. Have you ever forgiven someone you never thought you could forgive? Share your story with us. And if you think someone needs to hear this story, then share the video. Sometimes people need the hope that it can become bright again after the storm. Until the next video, look after yourself and don't forget that every family has its own unique story. Cheers.